First of all, Dr. Lewis, thank you. It's Susan Stone here. I'm the interim dean, and we thank you for being patient as we get our tech set. We are
Sure.
about to turn it over to you, but I'm going to give a few words of announcement and thanks before you begin.
Okay.
Okay. And just as a reminder, there are people in the room, but there are also people viewing you as well in this webinar format. So I am very pleased to introduce our guest, Dr. Charles Lewis Jr., who is currently director of the Congressional Research Institute for Social Work and Policy. By way of introduction, I was introduced to Charles Lewis in person, Dr. Lewis in person, because we are both members of the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare. Dr. Lewis was inducted, therefore his significant efforts in advancing the subfield of political social work. Dr. Lewis embodies, I think, many of the things that we want to promote in our MSW program, where we truly want to represent to students the possibilities of both micro and macro practice. Dr. Lewis, your profile fits that. You have an MSW from Clark Atlanta University, MSW focused in clinical counseling, then your PhD degree is from Columbia, where you focused on social policy. You've had a career as the chief of staff and communications director for former Congressman Ed, and now my notes, Ed Towns, of course. And otherwise, you've just had an illustrative career teaching in social work, and I think most recently, really with the intention of raising social work voices, researchers to our Congress members at the federal level. It's a delight to have you talking. Sometimes us on the West Coast, we feel very far from DC, and we thank you for your facilitation of Social Work Voice. And I want to note that you were a founding member of the Social Work Congressional Caucus as well. Also in the audience, Dr. Lewis, is Dr. Corey Jackson, our assemblyman, who is here. So we've had a day of social workers active in state at federal levels here in the audience, and Dr. Jackson's portfolio covers just about every social work issue you might imagine. So he will join us in this audience as well, and like you, model what it looks like to span micro to macro social work. So without further ado, I want to thank you for spending time with us today at what must be a pretty busy time and late at night. So without further ado, Dr. Lewis.
And thank you, Dr. Stone. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about what I call the fundamentals of strategic advocacy. Uh, do you know how much time I have? So I don't want to go over, but I'll just jump in here. So,
Oh, yeah, you can go ahead and take as long as you need.
okay. All right. So I've been in advocacy since I was a kid. My dad was a pastor. And so we in situations where we were looking out for poor people. I started writing for a community newspaper and wrote about a lot of issues like homelessness and poverty. So this has been my area for a while, but I didn't become a social worker until later in life. And so uh, I've been advocating for many, many years. Obviously, as a communications person. It's part of my DNA. So now I am doing advocacy for social work and its causes. As Dr. Stone said, I was on the Hill with former Congressman Ed Towns for a number of years, and then when he retired, we created the Congressional Research Institute for Social Work and Policy because we did create a Congressional Social Work Caucus. And we wanted to ensure that that caucus would be viable, that it would be doing things. And also, it has to be reauthorized for every Congress, so every 2 years. Uh, after after leaving the Hill and for a while, we focused on doing briefings on the Hill about various topics. And then in 2018, in the midst of former President Trump's first term, we raised the question, can social work help save democracy? Because there was a lot of talk about democracy and its institutions being imperiled. And so we created a 501c3 organization called the Social Work Democracy Project. And I'll tell you a little more about that later. So social workers are advocates. I mean, our profession is multidimensional, often described as micro, meso, and macro. But whatever category you fit in, there's an element of advocacy involved. So I come up with this term strategic advocacy. I'm sure it's not original, but the idea is that there is more to advocacy than just uh, you know, speaking out for a cause. That effective advocacy requires some thought and some planning, and that we have to find a balance between emotion and reason because many times we, as advocates, get very emotional about the causes we are promoting, and if we're not focus, sometimes we let the emotion take over, and we don't uh, use our rationale and reasoning as well as we should. So strategic advocacy involves using well-planned and targeted public campaigns to influence policy and decision making. It's about crafting a specific strategy that outlines goals, targets audiences, and methods to achieve desired outcomes. This can include a mix of lobbying, public campaigns, coalition building, and media engagement. The key is to be methodical and intentional in your approach to create meaningful long-term change. So you want to begin with the outcomes that you would like to see as in your advocacy. So the key question for me is, what do you want to accomplish? Advocacy is done to bring attention to an issue, problem, need, or injustice However, what you want as an outcome is a key question. And the more precise you are at the onset of your advocacy campaign, the more likely you are to achieve your goals. Are your goals measurable? Okay. You want to determine the specific change you want to achieve, such as increasing funding for mental health services by 20%, as an idea, as an example of a measurable goal. I guess maybe some of you remember Occupy Wall Street. It was a phenomenon for a while, and it comes for me. It was an advocacy campaign without clear objectives and goals. It also didn't have really identifiable leadership, and it was more of a protest than advocacy, but it advocated for a more equitable distribution of income and wealth, but little changed during its run. And if we look at inequality in the United States, it's not, it doesn't seem to be waning very much. And again, the campaign dissipated without accomplishing much. So it's what I call slogan advocacy. You know, we come up with slogans and it brings attention to a issue or a problem, but unless it is carefully thought out, it may not lead to significant or lasting change. Black Lives Matter. The Black Lives Matter movement raised the public's awareness about police brutality and inequities in the criminal justice system. It promoted economic justice and voting rights. One notable achievement was the introduction of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2021 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act of 2021. Both bills had significant numbers of co-sponsors, which is usually what's needed in order to move it. And it did pass the Democratic-led House of Representatives, but never made it through the Senate. I remember when Black Lives Matters first hit, the media, and it was catching attention. I was worried that it was going to draw some not backlash, but backlash, because you knew there was going to be people who say all lives matters. But I wonder what would have happened if the movement had come out as all lives matters. Would it have received as much backlash and opposition? We can discuss that at the end of this if you like. Okay, and this one really got me, defund the police. I knew that was a bad idea from the beginning, and it was open to interpretation and misinterpretation. People didn't know exactly what it meant, and many people don't know today exactly what it means, but Republicans are still using it against Vice President Kamala Harris, despite her background as a state prosecutor. And we would, at the congressional, Chris, which we're known by, we would tackle some of these issues. One, we did a briefing on the Hill about Black Lives Matters and the future of policing. One of the things that came out of this defund the police campaign was several bills that would substitute funding for police in schools and replace it with funding for social workers and other helping professions in the schools. And it was controversial. There were some, I remember the mayor of Chicago was not for swapping out police for social workers. felt that the police played a role for safety in the schools. I had colleagues in social work who felt that social workers should never collaborate or work with police. And so we brought together some voices and we discussed whether or not social workers should be engaged in non-enforcement responses, responding to maybe mental health problems. And one of the panelists was a sheriff from Michigan who had an MSW. So he was able to help us bridge that gap. Another key to strategic advocacy is effective messaging. It gotta get these slides. It's about getting people to listen to you, being at the table when decisions are made, and being heard by people who make decisions. It's about facing and overcoming resistance. It's about speaking and writing in compelling ways that make decision makers want to adopt ideas. Slogans can be effective at times, particularly to get attention, but there is more to advocacy than the slogan. It's about effectively promoting your ideas, and the quality of your ideas matter. So how you use them to promote your campaign. And I use this the success of the marriage equality movement as an example of effective messaging. Instead of focusing on the negative aspects of being denied their rights, the movement emphasized the positive benefits it would bring to society. So we see, right, that support for marriage equality grew over time because of their effective advocacy. So back in 2004, only 31% of Americans supported the idea of marriage equality. It was opposed by 60%. And you can see that the numbers changed dramatically over time because of the advocacy. It was because its communication was strategic, relying on data-driven strategies to target specific audiences and adapt its messaging to different contexts and regions. And it was hard to counter its slogan, which was "Love is love." This is an interesting phrase that I heard for the first time on Friday at the Council on Social Work Education annual program meeting. And it was used by Columbia University Dean Melissa Begg, who said during her remarks that she had heard this: listening to understand, not instead of listening to respond. Most times we're listening to what the other person is saying, but at the same time we are formulating the response in our heads rather than fully listening to what is being said. So public discourse requires reciprocity. So I'm calling this term principled pragmatism. I believe that if we are going to reach consensus on policies, we're going to have to not be rigid in our thinking. And while you have to hold on to your principles. Often policy solutions require compromise in order to reach a consensus. So the idea is you should struggle to remain principled, but at the same time, you must be pragmatic in order to get things done. Now, I can't see your hands, but how many of you know who this person is? And I would imagine that most of you do. And she's one of my favorite social workers, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. Now, I got to work with her quite a bit while she was in Congress. She was elected to Congress in 2011, and she created the Congressional Caucus on Foster Youth. And then the interesting thing is, she got elected to Congress in 2011, and she received her MSW from USC in 2015. So she was already in Congress, and she understood the value of having an MSW, and she went ahead and got it. Now, we worked closely with her on several bills on foster youth, and she convinced several Republicans to join the caucus because the Republicans have foster kids too. Using her social work skills, she helped them reach a consensus on several bills. There was give and take. And they brought other Republicans on as co-sponsors. And one of the bills that came about as a result of her influence and her work, even though she had left Congress by then, was HR 9076, which is the Protecting America's Children by Strengthening Families Act. And it was introduced by a Republican, Darren Hood, and Congressman Danny Davis, both from Illinois. And what this bill did was to reauthorize Title 4B of the Social Security Act for the first time since 2021 and delivers significant reforms. And with approximately 369,000 children currently in foster care, this legislation offers vital assistance to strengthen and keep families together and support the safety and well-being of children in foster care. And the most startling aspect of the bill is that it passed the Ways and Means Committee unanimously. That means all Republicans and all Democrats voted for this reauthorization. They added $75 million permanently to child welfare. And then it passed the House of Representatives 405 to 10, which is pretty unheard of in terms of legislation these days. And it will be signed into law shortly after Election Day. And it's going to happen because even if the Democrats lose the Senate, they will still be in charge until January. Now, I thought I would introduce this in my thinking in terms of strategic advocacy. It's a book that I read decades ago, but it had a profound impact on my thinking. The Path of Least Resistance focuses on the creative versus the reactive responsive orientation. The author is a musician, but he put his creative thinking to talk about how to create solutions. And what he's saying is that rather than responding to the negative, that the best approach to achieve one's goals is not to try to fix what's wrong, which is interesting because I remember when I finally got to social work, the problem solving model is promoted heavily in social work. And so it really, kind of clashed with my own thinking. And so instead of focusing on what's wrong, let's say with the school, what's bad with the school, to envision what a good school would look like. And that the tension between the two will draw you to the solution and attract the needed resources. I guess there's a element of faith in this, but it's worked for me on several occasions. Okay, so I just wanted to emphasize that when we do research, I think, particularly if the research is geared to inform policy, that you need to think about policy at the beginning of the research uh, instead of completing your research and then trying to find implications for policy. And I say that because often we do research and then we look for an opportunity to present our research to policymakers and legislators to promote our policy preferences. And so after the research is done, we think about the implications, but it's like you need to be able to think about the research in the context of the deliberations that are going on regarding the policy, because oftentimes those deliberations will inform your research questions and maybe just tweak them a bit, but it could make a difference because legislative bodies rarely rely on social science research because people in those settings tend to be lawyers and MPAs, and many of them want causal research. And so you must focus on at least some of the outcomes that are relevant to them. I was at a research symposium last week, and I heard a term that I hadn't heard before, and it made me think. But it was said that qualitative research is the strongest component of causal research. This was a symposium that was sponsored by a foundation that specializes in causal research. So that most of the time that means random control trials where the treatment group and the control group are randomly selected for the groups, and that is considered to be the most effective way of arriving at causality. But if you think about it, qualitative research often allows you to get to a better understanding than just quantitative data. So your research is much more valuable when done within the context of the policies that are being discussed. And those policy considerations should inform your research questions. Coalition building, that's almost a no-brainer that coalitions are essential to effective and strategic advocacy because they are strength in numbers. And then when you bring diverse groups with a common goal together, they can amplify their influence and make a stronger case for policy change. So I always like to think, when you're putting together a coalition, it must be done strategically as well. You want to know who are the players, what are they bringing to the table. You want people with different skills, knowledge, resources, You want to make sure that you have all of your bases covered, so to speak. And so it also allows for a more comprehensive and effective strategy. So coalitions can include organizations with different perspectives. We've seen that happen in many uh, social movements, which can help tailor messages and reach broader audiences. Working as a coalition can generate more media coverage and public awareness. A broad and diverse coalition is more likely to be taken seriously by decision makers, increasing the chances of achieving the desired policy outcomes. And this example is the Poor People's Campaign, led by North Carolina pastor Reverend William Barber. And the campaign has a really uh, audacious agenda: eradicating poverty, systemic racism, addressing ecological devastation, militarism and the war economy, and changing the narrative about poverty in this country from one that demonizes the poor to one which recognizes their strength and vision while questioning the morality of current public policy. And if you go on their website, they have a lot of information regarding the policies that they would like to put in place. So I think they've been quite strategic in terms of their advocacy. And so I would like to put in a little word about political social work. It's I guess it's not a official designation for social workers. It's certainly not a recognized field of practice yet, but we're working on making political social work a recognized field of practice, because I think it's a growing cadre of social workers who operate in the political arena. Some are elected officials. We encourage social workers to run for elected office because our voices need to be there. They could be staffers or just advocates who spend most of their time in legislative settings and the political arena promoting their causes. So a textbook, Shannon Lane, and she's at the Wurzweiler School of Social Work at Yeshiva University in New York. And Suzanne Priskert on the right is at the University of Houston, soon to be moving to the University of Pittsburgh. And they came together, they wrote a comprehensive textbook on political social work and how it works. So that I think that kind of legitimizes us to some degree. And I was fortunate to be able to write a foreword for them. So I can't talk about political social work without mentioning the late Nancy A. Humphreys, who actually was a mentor to me when I discovered that I should be identifying as a political social worker. When I finished my degree, I mentioned that I went back to school after being out of school for quite a while, and at the age of 42, I went back to get my BA, and then went to Clark Atlanta University and got my MSW in clinical counseling in 1997. And then I went to Columbia and graduated in 2002. And I at the time, I didn't want to go into academia. I thought I was like too old to be a junior faculty president, that I wanted to make change. And I was looking for places where I could take my skills and knowledge to make change. But I was convinced to join the faculty at Howard University School of Social Work, and I taught there for 8 years. Didn't get tenure, and because I really that wasn't my goal, and I was doing too many things outside the school rather than sitting at my computer and churning out articles. But it was okay because Congressman Towns, who was the chair of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, invited me to the Hill, and I spent several years there with him, and we created the Congressional Social Work Caucus. So when I was leaving Howard University to go to work for Mr. Towns, my thinking at that time was that I was leaving social work and going into politics. And there are many people who think like that, and what I know, when I got to the Hill, I kept meeting social workers who were not, very, they were not, they didn't identify as social workers. And it disturbed me for some time. I even wrote a blog saying that social workers on the Hill need to come out of the closet and, recognize that you're social workers. We need to really focus on getting more social workers. When I arrived on the Hill in 2010, I believe there were around 10 social workers on the Hill, and then at the start of the new Congress in January, there will be 2. So we've lost quite a few. Congresswoman Lee will be leaving. She had chaired the Social Work Caucus since Mr. Towns had stepped down and had retired. Fortunately, we have Sylvia Garcia, Congresswoman from the 29th District in Texas, who will be our champion on the Hill as the chair of the Social Work Caucus. And we're going to be building, we got to build a pipeline to the caucus, and it has to be deliberate. So I'll be talking more about that in the coming days. And so when I decided, I was being advised by several different people to create this nonprofit to make sure that the Social Work Caucus would be viable. And Betsy Clark, late Betsy Clark at NASW said, well, before you do anything, go see Nancy Humphreys. And I did, and she let me know that I was a political social worker. And she had been advocating for political social work for a long time before I got there. And she established the Nancy A. Humphreys Institute for Political Social Work at the University of Connecticut. So I must give her my props. Her props. So we had social workers working in the political arena. Dr. Dorothy A. Height, she was the president of the National Council of Negro Women, and she was an advisor to several presidents. And some of you may recognize Jane Addams of Hull House. She became the first woman to second the nomination of a major party presidential candidate. She seconded the nomination of Teddy Roosevelt at the 1912 Progressive Party. And here's one of my favorite iconic photographs. I'm sure you can recognize the person on the left as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and the guy in the center is President at the time, Lyndon B. Johnson. And I wonder how many people know the guy on the right. Okay, well, I can't see your hands, so I'll tell you. Whitney M. Young Jr., social worker, dean of the Atlanta School of Social Work, which became Clark Atlanta University School of Social Work. And the school is currently named after him appropriately. And he was also president of, he got fame for his work with the Urban League, but he also was president of the National Association of Social Workers. So we had a social worker in the Oval Office at the table. Okay, we need to be at the table because our voices do matter. You may see this graphic over my shoulder. So we are running a modest campaign in 4 of the battleground states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina, where we had shirts made with this graphic, and we sent them to schools of social work in those 4 states, asking the students there to wear them on the campus, in their neighborhoods, at the mall, and church, wherever there may be other young people, and that they would to encourage these young people to vote. It's a nonpartisan effort, because social work schools are really leery about getting too deep into the political arena, so we had to make it nonpartisan. We started late, and the reason we started late is because I hadn't planned to do this until I listened to Michelle Obama's speech at the Democratic National Convention, and it kind of like blew me away. And she said, "Do something." So I came up with this idea. It's modest, but at least we're doing something. Because even if we don't tell the young people who to vote for, we do know that young voters are more progressive than their older people, than older voters, and that they are more likely to support policies that social workers would agree with. So finally, I want to tell you about a LinkedIn group. If you are on LinkedIn, please connect with me. Um, you just, do a search for my name and connect with me, and I will connect you to my network. We created a LinkedIn group called Chris Pals, Political Advocacy Leaders. And the reason I did that is because I've had the real pleasure of working with many young social workers over the course of the last decade. They've, participated in our Student Advocacy Day, which will be Thursday, March 20th, in 2025. You'll be hearing more about that. Our Social Work Day on the Hill will be Wednesday, March 19th. It will be our 10th Social Work Day on the Hill. So we're going to make a big splash of it. We're going to do a gala that evening. But one of the most rewarding aspects of with the work that I do is engaging with young social workers who are eager to make change. And there's just so many of them, I just couldn't keep in touch and track with them. So we created this network of not only young social workers, we have faculty in this group, in Chris Pals. I think we have a couple of deans who have joined. The idea is that we have a network of people who are primarily interested in engaging in the political arena, and that after the election, when I have a little more time, we're going to be using this as a place to connect like-minded social workers. So social workers in the political arena who are interested in child welfare, criminal justice, and other issues, housing, education, that they can, form interest groups. We will be doing a number of virtual seminars and webinars talking about key issues to the social work profession. And it's like that. So please, if you want to be more engaged. And it's, like I said, it's for micro social workers, meso social workers, as well as macro social workers. And that's it for me.
Oh, do we have questions from the web? Okay, great. While we're waiting, any questions from the audience?
Yes, please.
Hey there, my name is Mark. How do you raise funding for the advocacy work? Because a lot of times if you're doing some sort of advocacy for low-income communities or people like that who need the help, there's not as much money there as opposed to if you're a lobbyist for like a tech firm or something like that. So do you have any advice for people who want to do this type of advocacy work? But it's you say you care about something deeply. How do you get people together and somehow scrounge up enough money to actually have the full-time ability to do that work?
So I'll be honest and say that I've been operating on a shoestring for a long time. Um, the events that we do in March are largely supported by schools of social work. The deans have provided sponsorship for our events, and so that we're able to do those events. I stumbled on a foundation recently who specializes in funding advocacy groups, and so there's a possibility that I might get some resources there. For the Our Voices Matter campaign that we just did, I did a GoFundMe drive and raised enough money to get 1,000 T-shirts and send them to the schools. I think there are. I tell all my social work colleagues that you're going to have to go to the private sector to get funding because the uh, government is not. The money has been transferred from our government sources to private hands, and so I think you have to just seek out people who support your cause, and I think that it's all possible to raise some resources. If you contact me, my email, I should have put it on the on this presentation, but it is C.E. Lewis Jr., CELEWIS, like Edward, C. Edward, LEWIS, JR, at CRISP, CRISP, Inc., INC.org. So if you email me, we can delve into that a bit farther.
All right, thank you.
Any more questions?
There is a question in the Q&A of the webinar. So it says, "Hi, Dr. Lewis. I admire your work. Your bio on the CRISP website says that several years ago you spoke at the Center for American Progress on Black Men and Social Policy. You offered your opinion that overrepresentation of young people of color in the criminal justice system was the #1 civil rights issue for African Americans at that time. Can you give an update on how that issue is being addressed in both government and for social work profession, especially for men and boys?"
Well, there has been a decline, not a significant decline in the overall prison population. Um, but at that time, I said at that time it was the number was, I think the number one civil rights issue now, which would have a significant impact on uh, the amount of young men, young men of color and youth of color who are getting entangled with the criminal justice system is early childhood education, or and not only just early childhood education, but also addressing the uh, social, psychological, and emotional needs of children. One of the things that we've been doing recently is focusing on children of incarcerated parents because the research tells us that they are much more likely to engage in risky behavior and find their way into the criminal justice system because they experience significant trauma when they're separated from their parents. Um, and that trauma is not really addressed because in schools, you don't want to single these children out because they can be stigmatized. That's what's being said. Uh, and so their trauma often goes untreated, unaddressed. So the more we can focus on the needs of that population, we can maybe reduce some of the numbers that are getting caught up in the criminal justice system.
Dr. Lewis, this is Susan Stone, and I have a question for you. I am
Mhm.
really interested. One of the goals of CRISP is to connect social work ideas or social work research recess. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm imagining recess. Um, but to Congress members, and I want to know what are the mechanics of that look like? What do you do? How do you do that? And where do you go? And um, what might that look like in practice?
Okay, so in fact, what that bill that I talked about in my presentation, it was it addressed children of incarcerated parents, and uh, there is language in the bill to keep children, in communication with their uh, parents while the parent is inside, and their efforts to, like there's uh, policies that would increase the visitation of children, and so that part of the rationale for or the reason that got in there was because of the research of a young professor at University of Washington in Seattle, Tamarie Willis. That was part of her dissertation. And we did a briefing on the Hill, but we also worked, uh, brought that research to Congressman Danny Davis, who was the sponsor of the Second Chance Act. And so it's relationships. We had a relationship with his office. And so if you have some, if, again, the research has to be relevant. And I suggest that, you just don't do research and then decide, let me see if this fits. That, you think about that at the onset of the research, but that if you have research and it's relevant to uh, an a issue or legislation, then we'll walk it to the office of the person who's on that committee. Because so basically, that's how you identify who would be who may be interested in the research is knowing what committees they are on, and so that's the areas that they focus on. So we have the social work caucus is not as strong as it used to be, but we still have about 40 members on the caucus, and we're going to step up our engagement and get them to be more responsive to social workers. And yes, so we're working at it. And if you have something, Susan, let me know.
Thank you. Do we have more? Oh, another question online, Dr. Lewis.
Sure, I have no rush. Not in a rush.
Thank you. So the next question is from Ash. So, hi, Dr. Lewis. Do you have any ideas on how to promote refined social work values in organizations such as labor unions, or examples of what you've seen work effectively?
Interesting question. I have not worked much with labor unions, so it's really difficult for me to be really specific about because labor unions have culture of its own, and but I believe that you can advocate to unions regarding policies and ideas just by knocking on the door, going to the union, looking for requesting opportunities to meet with the union. Like I said, coalitions would be helpful. The more people who are engaged in that activity, it would probably get a better result. But that's something to think about. And can I ask you, is the person in the room? I just wanted to know what prompted the question.
And is online, so maybe we can
Oh, it's
wait
online.
and see
Okay,
if
all right.
they send in another one. But we did also just get another question from someone online,
Okay.
unrelated to this one.
Okay.
So this one is from Dr. Angie Perrone. She is one of our faculty members. I've heard from other SW advocates in the DC that one of the challenges is that we do not have a good sense of how many social workers exist. Because we have many social workers who practice macro or in other spaces that do not require a license, how do we strengthen our positions in DC and other spaces given this potential challenge?
Hmm. Okay. There is an effort by several schools to begin to try to collect that information, that data, in terms of where social workers are in terms of um, in federal government and maybe nonprofits. But it's difficult. I at one point I saw I started out to see if I can identify the social workers on the Hill, and I was told that I contacted several offices asking if there were social workers in that office, and they said we we don't collect that kind of information. And then again, like I said, social workers often do not identify as social workers in those settings. I don't know, I don't know why. Maybe there's possibility of having some sort of campaign to have social workers. Who knows? Maybe my LinkedIn group will attract some social workers in that area. Yeah, but I can see where that could be a concern.
Dr. Lewis, we've come to the end of our time. We thank you so much for agreeing to come to speak with us on strategic advocacy, especially at such a very, very, very busy time in the cycle.
Yeah.
And we appreciate your efforts. And for those of us who don't know, Berkeley Social Welfare is a proud sponsor of CRISP.
Yes.
And and we are even though we're far, it's exciting to think about the possibility of some of us joining you on the Hill.
That would be wonderful.
So thank you so much. And another round of applause.
And thank you for the invitation. I always welcome the opportunity to share this.
Thank you so much.
Okay. I look forward to seeing you soon, Susan.
You
Even if
too.
even if it's on Zoom.
I've never seen you in person.
It'll happen. It will happen. Okay. Take care.
Take care.